I have actually moved cross country 4 times. Once from Philly to Hawaii and then back again. Once from Philly to Los Angeles. And my most recent move was from LA and back to the Philly area in 2020. In this episode, I'm gonna share a little bit about what I've learned from uprooting my entire life each time. For those unfamiliar with my background, I was born and raised in New Jersey and went to college at Temple University in Philadelphia, and I lived in Philly for 8 years before moving to Hawaii. There was a part of me that always knew my life path would be unconventional, and it was often juxtaposed with the part of me that wanted comfort and safety. I was living with my brother Matt in Philadelphia in 2010. And at the time, JetBlue ran this ridiculous all-you-can-jet special that was something like $300, and you could fly as many times as you wanted through them over a month period. So I took advantage of the opportunity, and I was in the middle of visiting friends in LA, Portland, Phoenix, and Chicago when my brother calls and tells me that he is in a mission to pay off his student loan debt and wants to move back home. We had just moved into our apartment a couple months earlier, and I did so with the intention of staying there for 5 years. I knew eventually he would move out, but I planned on getting in a relationship and settling down. I've been moving every year for 6 or 7 years, and I was tired and I wanted to build roots. So his plan threw a wrench in mine, and because I was too broke to afford a place on my own and I didn't have anybody to live with, I ended up back at my parents' house for my 27th birthday. At this time in my life, my ego was very strong, and I was very disturbed to be bursting the bubble of the identity I had of being a strong, independent woman. I was ashamed to be back at home and unsure of where my future was leading me. And this was a time when uncertainty was very uncomfortable for me. I decided to make the best of the experience, and I used the opportunity to grow. So I bought a ton of books on design and typography and logo development because at the time I ran a graphic design company and I wanted to find ways to take more risks and make more money. So I studied, and I also committed to a meditation practice. It was the last time my whole family would be living together under the same roof, and looking back on it, it was a really great time. I started to get the pull to take the opportunity to move abroad. A part of me had always dreamed of moving somewhere warm, so I started to look into Airbnbs in Spain and Mexico. And then one night I was on Facebook, and one of my closest friends that I'd met at Temple was living with her family in Hawaii. And I saw that she posted a Craigslist ad for an open room. So I called her and I decided to move to Hawaii. I moved to Maui. I bought the ticket that night and I flew out 2 weeks later in March 2011. The move to Maui was illuminating for me in many ways. One, in that I was far away from my comfort zone and all the people who knew me best. While my close friend was there, she was living with her boyfriend at the time and had a huge extended family. And that proved to be wonderful for me in that they all took me in, but it was challenging in that I was away from everything I'd known and I was immersed in a new culture. I lived on Maui for 8 months, and during that time, I began to feel how insecure I was. I felt uncomfortable in my skin, lethargic, fairly antisocial, and this was the start of being confronted with the reality of who I was and how I felt about myself, but only in very tiny ways. I think it could have taken me much longer to see those aspects of myself if I hadn't moved. When I look back at my time on Maui, it feels divinely orchestrated. I think that the energy on the island began to work on me, and ultimately I was too disconnected from the earth, from my heart, and from my spiritual connection to stay. The island is so much more beautiful and magical than I could have ever imagined, and it will always hold a very special place in my heart. When I moved back to the mainland, I landed back at my parents' house in New Jersey, unsure of what was next. The part of me that wanted comfort wanted to move to New York City, to be near home and everyone I knew. But again, I had nobody to live with. So at this time, I was reconnected with a very old friend of mine from childhood who was living in LA, and I tried to convince him to move to New York City with me. And instead, he convinced me to move to LA. I had just visited him there on my all-you-can-jet trip, and I really enjoyed my time there, but he was sure that I would actually love it and not want to leave. So his roommate happened to be moving out, and then I decided to commit to 6 months of staying there, and in February 2011, I moved to Los Angeles. At the time, I had this plan to live in different places for about 3 months at a time until I found the place that felt like home. And based on my experience living on Maui, I felt like 3 months was enough time to get a feel for what it's like to live somewhere. But because I was moving to LA with my friend, I decided to give it a little extra time and I committed to 6 months. Moving to Los Angeles changed my life in the most unexpected ways. I moved there during my Saturn return, something I was completely unfamiliar with at the time. I intended to stay just for a few months, like I said, and I had this idea that it was a superficial place and that it would be difficult to connect with anyone. Instead, LA became a great love of my life. I ended up living there not for 6 months, but for an entire decade. And I honestly don't think I would have ever moved if things hadn't gotten shaken up in 2020. I made some of the best friends of my life in LA. I discovered breathwork there. I met my mentor there. I fell in and out of love several times there. I learned to love myself in LA. I learned to be seen there. I shared myself and I taught workshops. I built relationships, community, and I found myself in LA. LA holds a very special place in my heart, and I still sometimes don't understand why I'm here, living outside of Philadelphia where the weather can be bitter and the energy just doesn't feel as interesting. All I can say is that I got 3 intuitive hits to move back to the area I was born in 2020, and I listened and moved. I don't have regrets and I don't feel called to go back to LA. I feel very clear that this is where I'm meant to be right now, though I have yet to fully understand why. I think there are different reasons we're called to different geographic locations, and we have different lessons at different periods of time in our lives. There's a bit of irony for me in this timing of this move. I spent many years finding myself in LA and missing my family and all of the community I had in Philly. By the time I ended up moving, I had some of the most incredible friends of my life, true soul family to support me. And then when I landed back here, I had no friends left in the area, and it's as if I'm starting over. The biggest reason I'm here is because of my family. Living away from everyone for a decade was difficult. We're all really close. I always longed to have the ability to hop in my car and pop in on my parents. And though the reality is that it doesn't happen as much as it would if we live less than 2 hours apart, it does happen far more frequently than it did when I lived cross country. And being able to celebrate my parents' birthdays and all holidays with my family is really special. My sister lives in the apartment above my house. I get to see my nieces and nephews and not feel like they've grown insanely since the last time I've seen them. And that's something that's really meaningful for me and feels like a deep pull, not an intellectual choice. I haven't quite found the vibe or the people or my partner here yet. I trust that while I may not fully understand why I was guided here, there is a purpose, maybe a couple of purposes. One of those purposes is my particular energy being here for a reason. I've just begun to host some in-person workshops, and I'm going to be taking on some one-on-one in-person clients here as well. So if you're in the Philly area, you can hit me up. I know that there's more building and creating to do. Soul family will arrive, and so will my partner. More is going to transpire, and I'm excited for this part of the journey to be even more rewarding than my decade in LA. The last thing I want to talk about is this sense of belonging. When I lived in Philly the first time, I felt like I belonged. I had my family around me, a lot of friends. Getting out of my comfort zone and moving to Hawaii stirred up some stuff in me. Making friends felt hard, and so did dating. And then I moved to LA, and I had similar feelings at first. Much of this was because I was changing and growing. Parts of me were beginning to surface that had gone unseen for a long time, and I was transforming and being guided into a deeper spiritual journey. In LA, I got to a place where I felt like I was home. I felt like I belonged there. It felt really good to live there. And now being back on the East Coast, there's this clunkiness again, this acclimating to my new home and finding my way here. Ultimately, I have to reroot myself here. I have to surrender and trust and create and grow. Each phase of the journey feels different, but now I have uprooted myself at a time when I belong to me. I know who I am. I love myself. I love the work I do. I trust the universe, and I know it's all gonna work out. I don't have to seek out belonging. Belonging is here. I belong in my body. I belong on this planet. I am exactly where I need to be, and that connection tethers me to home. If you're in a time of transition and you need some support, you can check out my digital workshop, Embracing Change, which I'll link to in the notes. My next episode is called The Power of Affirmations and How They Actually Work. And in it, I clear up some common misunderstandings about affirmations and how they can really support your healing.